It's America's Cup launch season and the new boats are coming out of the shed thick and fast. Hi, I'm Helen Fretter, editor of Yachting World, and we're continuing our look at the second generation AC75s ahead of the countdown to the 37th America's Cup in Barcelona this autumn. To give us some insight into these incredible boats, I'm really pleased we're joined again by Tison. Thomas is a naval architect and yacht designer who's worked on some really interesting and innovative projects, including working with 4 America's Cup campaigns and in this cycle within the Britannia. Thank you, Thomas. So today we're going to take a look at Emirates Team New Zealand, who launched their boat on April the 12th and most impressively managed to get sailing the very same day. So obviously, Thomas, Emirates Team New Zealand created the fastest AC75 so far with their winning boat last time around. When a design team sit down to start creating their boat, is the first thing they do look at what the Kiwis did last time and take it from there?
Yes, definitely. We have to start somewhere. And so we look at where the team was at the previous campaign. We look also at every other teams and where they had an edge, what they did different, what might have led them in this direction. And so for sure, Team New Zealand, everybody has studied the boat and has tried to gain even inside information.
So how much of an advantage do they have as having the benchmark boat and also having created this second iteration of the rule?
I think it's clear that they have an advantage because they know each other as a team. They have the processes. They all respect each other. And the main one is that they know what has worked and the path that has taken them to arrive at this design. And so from another team, sometimes you look at their design solutions, but you don't know why they arrived at it. So you have to sort of work your way backwards, which takes time. And so they have this sort of double advantage of having done something successful, knowing why they are there, and potentially they have already looked into the future and were not ready to commit to the next level.
So they could be even further ahead than what we can see.
Yeah.
So of what we can see from their new boat, how much of that is a refinement and how much of it is fresh thinking?
I think there's refinements in the aerodynamic shape of the hull and the deck. This is clear, where they have tried to remove some developed area of the construction to save weight. But there's also a completely new thinking in the back with a new shape of deck combings, a shorter track, and a new control system for the mainstay.
One thing that's noticeable on the Emirates boat is that their bustle seems to run all the way along the hull length with the rudder hung from it or from a skeg on it. So what's the thinking between having that running all the way aft and the full length of the boat?
I think there's an advantage in terms of aerodynamics because you're sort of better end plating the mainsail against the water. What we call end plating is closing the gap between the boat and the water so that the wind is stopped from going under the boat. And that's very important. That's what we are all trying to achieve. Now, in the very back of the boat, it's not as important as just under the mainsail. But what they have done still can provide a marginal gain. And if you can take this gain, then why not take it? Yeah, so I think generally what we see is that the hull shape is a progression from the previous America's Cup. We can see the same sort of architecture with the 2 cockpit pods. And generally the hull shape and the bustle is generally similar to the previous America's Cup. So what the teams are trying to do is to have either a shape which is quite rounded for takeoff and minimizing weighted surface area, or a more blade-like shape, a little bit like Luna Rossa, which is nicer in waves and during takeoff. And so there's this trade-off that all the teams are looking for.
And that having that rounded shape, which is maybe a little bit harder in those interim phases, how does that work in the wave conditions we're expecting in Barcelona?
Well, yeah, I think it's inferior to the blade shape in the waves. That's clear. But the subject really is how the team is projecting itself towards the future. Is it more important to take off and then go very fast, or are they planning to have problems in waves? And this is what we'll have to see when the boats are actually sailing and racing. Personally, I like the philosophy of Team New Zealand that are thinking, well, the most important is to just take off and foil very fast. It seems to be the most likely approach.
So I know one of the other key areas all the teams are working on, isn't it? It's weight reduction, and particularly in these hull sides and how they're either cut away or tapering down. So what have New Zealand done here?
Yeah, and you can see on this picture that they have really tapered the cockpit pods down to the main deck level. And this is as part of their work for the back of the boat. And the reason they have done this is to save weight, essentially. So I wanted to show this diagram because typically the deck, the only function it has is to make the hull watertight. And so from a weight point of view, you only want a flat surface as direct as possible. Every time you add a coaming and a vertical surface, it basically adds weight. And that's something we do time and time again on all racing yachts, is to remove the vertical surfaces of deck. And I think that's what we are seeing here on Team New Zealand, is that they are improving the flow on the cockpits, but they are also saving weight at the same time by tapering these cockpit pods down to the main deck level.
And then with that, you're having to bring the main down as well to create that end plate all the way, aren't you?
Yeah. So it's a win in pretty much all directions.
So of the big changes then, what have they changed at the back of the boat?
Yeah, I think this is where, when you look at this picture, you can really see that they have tried to save weight, they have tried to improve aerodynamics, and they have come up with a brand new main sheet system. And so this is quite exciting to see, because I think it's a powerful idea, and it's one that we don't see in any other team at the moment.
So what's going on underneath the hull or underneath that fairing that is different to what we've seen so far?
So I've prepared a little sketch, and I think what's important to understand is that there has been a change in the rule that means there are no longer backstays, and the ring now is held by the main sheet. And so the key is how to deal with this load and the fact that the main sheet will change in angle, because you want to be able to trim the sail either more vertically or more horizontally. And this is a key aspect of this time in the America's Cup. So this time there are no longer backstays, and that's a key aspect of designing the boat, and that you are sort of holding the rig via the main sheet. And so that's both a big load, and that's a load that will change in direction. And so if we look now inside the boat, and this is from, as an example, the Luna Rossa LEQ12, there is typically a beam inside the boat which is hinged at the extremity. And this beam rotates, and there are two downsides to the beam rotating. One is that it's quite deep and it takes a lot of space in the boat. So you're trying to sort of make the boat more aerodynamics, but you have this great big beam rotating inside the boat. And it's also quite heavy. And the second one, and I think that's the key for this America's Cup, is that because you're pulling most of the time in the center, it's trying to bend. And you have to imagine you have the cyclers who are limited and can create a certain amount of energy. And part of this energy is basically spent bending the boat instead of trimming the sails. And this is where Team New Zealand have managed to work on many aspects. If you look at this picture, they have first reduced the width of the track compared to the boat before. And that means that it bends much less. And the other one is that they have kept it fixed to save weight. But the downside is that then they have an internal pole to react the force that is not aligned with the track. And I think that's what we are seeing on the pictures of Team New Zealand at the moment.
So you save weight, presumably in the construction, because there's less material involved in that bit of structure. And then you're saving energy efficiency as well, because you're not having to fight that bending force.
Exactly. And so it's a sort of a win-win situation, because you can have a shallower boat, a more aerodynamic shape, you're saving weight, you're saving energy, And the only downside is this small internal moving structure, but it's almost a no-brainer, really.
Is there any disadvantage to not having a wider track when it comes to handling these boats?
So I think, yes, potentially it's about the range of trim of the sails. And you have to think that most of the time the boats are going so fast that the sail is in the center. But there are moments, for instance, when you want to take off, that it may be necessary to ease the sail to gain speed faster. So this is something we will have to look at. But you also have to keep in mind that Team New Zealand is very good as a group of sailors to come up with ways of using the boats that other teams have not foreseen or not anticipated.
And when we're talking about these sails, these boats have twin skin mainsails, don't they? So what, in basic terms, what is the advantage to that over a conventional single skin main?
So I think the main advantage really is in the interaction between the mast and the sail. If you have a large mast and the sail behind, you sort of have a perturbation of the wind and the flow around the sail. And so this whole idea now is to have a very sort of aerodynamic geometry, which is both in the sail and the mast. That's really the key aspect, the key advantage of having a double mainsail. There's, of course, a downside, which is in terms of weight and in terms of trimming this system.
And Emirates Team New Zealand have been on the water. I think they've managed to get out something like 10 days already. The boat's been launched about 2 weeks. That's pretty impressive in terms of commissioning a boat of this complexity. What we have managed to, we've obviously managed to see them using some of these systems. And one of those systems is that twin mainsail trimming. So they seem to have independent trim of the two skins. Is that new as well?
It's kind of new. I mean, the systems on other boats, they have sort of a differential trimming system between the two sails and the main control system. I think it doesn't really bring, at the moment, from what I can see, an advantage. You can reach exactly the same sort of shape, but it's probably easier and more repeatable to trim the sail with the system. I think really the key is, perhaps from what I see, not that they will have a better mainsail trimming system or so on, but more in terms of energy consumption. And of course, also they don't have this sort of big bump around the bottom corner of the mainsail, which houses the hydraulic systems on the other teams. And it's not that bad aerodynamically, but Team New Zealand, they have managed to put the hydraulic rams under the deck, and so they no longer have this big bump in the back.
Okay. Okay.
So it only affects a portion of the full sail, and it's the bottom portion when there's less wind and so on. So it's kind of like saving performance in many small areas. That's really the game of the America's Cup, and it's about all of these small little gains, which all at the end add up to win.
Of what you've seen so far, how impressive is this straight out of the box?
Oh, I think it's super impressive, and Team New Zealand, they keep doing this time and time again. And no, it's super impressive. And what one has to understand is that at the stage we're at, every team has a different culture. And Team New Zealand, they have this culture of moving forward, being sure of themselves. And so the decisions are taken in that respect. And it's really an example, I think.
They do seem to be able to come up with more creative solutions. And I say we never see the ones that they reject, but they do seem to come up with creative solutions every time. It is part of their team ethos, clearly.
Yeah, and you know, we often speak about the sailing performance and sometimes about the design, but there's totally another aspect, which is the management and the culture in the team. And of course, Team New Zealand, they have this advantage of being a small group, and so you can sit 5 or 6 people around the table who are at the top of their game and taking decisions. And for some other teams, they have a different method, which can also lead to being successful, but it's more difficult for them to reach this kind of decision.
we will take a look at what the other teams are doing. We've got 5 of the 6 boats have been at least partially unveiled, although haven't seen so many of the others on the water yet. And we will come back to it soon, if that's okay with you, Thomas.
Sounds perfect.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.